I stopped adding makers at around 155. How do you even decide how to organize such a video? Do you start a maker's timeline when the company was founded? Or do you start it when the company started making motorcycles? In the case of Husqvarna, you might be surprised to find out that the company has been around since 1689. Of course, back then they were only a firearms manufacturer. Technically, they didn't start making motorcycles until 1903. Another interesting point is that most motorcycle makers from the early years, that being the turn of the century, started out either making bicycles or fixing motors to bicycle frames. In fact, I would say most makers in the early years went through an evolution from motor bicycle to actual motorcycles. Another issue I ran into is, how do you define a motorcycle company? It's pretty easy in the case of maybe Harley-Davidson. They make motorcycles, and they always have. But it starts to get really complicated really quickly. There are many companies that produce many products and just happen to also produce motorcycles for a period of time. Many early car companies started out making motorcycles, then started making just cars, or perhaps both. Many motorcycle companies stopped making motorcycles and are now just making scooters or mopeds. Should a scooter or moped company count? A factor that influenced my decision not to include many companies is that there is now a large number of companies that just make 125cc motorcycles for the Asian market, and it's kind of unclear if they are doing their own engineering or just re-engineering Japanese or European designs with different fairings. Unsurprisingly, China is at the center of this practice. Because I have a particular disdain for the theft of intellectual property by the Chinese government/industry, I chose not to include many of their companies. Although I did include some companies that undoubtedly participated in design theft. My criteria for including companies is fairly broad, but it came down to a few specific criteria. Firstly, are they well known? This one's easy. Ducati may not make as many motorcycles as Yamaha, but they're very well known for good reasons. Next, do they produce a significant number of motorcycles? Were they significant to motorcycle history overall? Were they significant to the history of the country they came from? And finally, was I able to find information about the company? I gave up on some companies that were mentioned on different internet lists because there wasn't enough readily available information. I just don't have time to hunt down every little company from the early 1900s that made motorcycles for a couple months and then stopped.